Well, hello and welcome to a very special edition of Mainframe Comic-Con. Dave Gibbons, an absolute legend in the comic book field, co-creator of Watchmen, the sole creator of the originals, winner of the Inkpot Award, Jack Kirby Award, Harvey Award, Hall of Fame inductee. Well, he is here with us today to talk about these and other career milestones and his upcoming event over at Talent Talk Live. So without further ado, allow me to welcome to Mainframe, Mr. Dave Gibbons. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Chuck. Thanks for inviting me here. Really looking forward to having a good chat with you, and happy to begin when you want to begin.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to go ahead and start off first and talk a little bit about an upcoming fan event you have with the folks over at Talent Talk Live, where fans can get commissioned art pieces. They can participate in a live Q&A session, plus the proceeds of the event are going to go to benefit the Hero Initiative. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of how you got involved with the folks over at Talent Talk and maybe what ticket holders can expect from the event?
Wow. Well, I mean, basically the idea of Talent Talk is it gives some fans and interested people a chance to talk with their favorite creators and to, discuss things, ask questions that maybe haven't been asked before. And I usually really enjoy them because you get an interesting mix of people who all really, really want to be there. Indeed, they paid money to be there. And they tend to ask a really interesting kind of range of questions that you don't always get in a regular Q&A if it's done by a journalist or something like that. They also get a sketch card drawn, so they have a little souvenir of the experience. And I mean, as a creator, I always enjoy talking to fans because that's how you get your feedback. You spend most of your time sitting in a room on your own, wondering if anybody cares about this stuff. But when you get into a good conversation with fans, you realize, yeah, people actually do. And the fact that the money that they pay goes towards the Hero Initiative, just makes the whole thing complete because Hero do a lot of really good work, taking care of, helping out comic artists and writers who have fallen on hard times or having a financial or a health crisis. And, I'm a great believer in charity. And I think, as they say, charity begins at home. And I think for those of us in the comic book business, Hero is our home. So I'm always really very happy to do what I can to help out there. And this business we're in, comics, is a little bit of a lottery. Some people do quite well, other people don't do so well. And when you think of, the odd little things that your career path took that made the difference that may or may not have happened, you can see that kind of there, but for the grace of God, go I. So I think it's incumbent on all of us who have got a following to utilize that to help others who haven't been quite as fortunate.
Absolutely. Well, I want to talk a little bit about a message to some of aspiring comic book creators. I've heard you say in the past that when you were first starting out in the industry, you learned pretty much at a young age that in order to make it in comics, you got to have two of these three things. You got to be good, you got to be reliable, but almost more importantly than anything else is you got to be a nice person. Do you think those rules still apply today? And what are some other tips you might give to aspiring comic book creators?
Wow. Well, it's strange, that piece of advice. I don't know where I first heard it. I mean, I've adopted it and made it my own. I've heard Neil Gaiman say it as well. So maybe I swiped it from him, or maybe we both swiped it from the same source. But yeah, I mean, it's true. That's what you need in the comic book business because it is about collaboration. So you've got to be the kind of person that likes other people and likes to take input and converse with other people. It helps if you're really, really good, because if you're really, really good, you're going to get work, no problem. But really, in a thing that's so time conscious as comics, to be reliable is almost as important as being good. And certainly when I was starting out, I wasn't that good. I mean, I was just about borderline, but I like to think I am a reasonably nice guy, and at least I could turn whatever rubbish I was doing in on time, So I think that helped me a lot at the beginning of my career. And so that's the one piece of advice that I always give to people. And I suppose there's the thing they say nowadays. It's much better to under promise and over deliver, so you sometimes can be your own worst enemy by taking on more work than you can comfortably do. So that's something else that's important as well.
I mean, that's good advice for just about industry, but it can also wind up biting you, trying to promise more than you can deliver. I want to hop into the time machine, if you don't mind, just a little bit. I mean, we saw a big wave of new talent coming in from across the pond, names like, of course, Alan Moore and Brian Bolland and Kevin O'Neill. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences churning out books in the UK and then coming to the States to work over at DC?
Yeah, I mean, it had always really been my ambition to work in American comics. I used to read and collect and do my own American style comics when I was growing up. I bought all the Silver Age stuff off the stands when it came out, all the early Marvel issues, all the Julie Schwartz revival of the DC universe. And so I was always sort of gravitating towards American comics. But I came to America in the early 70s and showed my samples around, and wasn't really successful in getting any work. But I did use those same samples to get work in England. And again, by being a nice guy and being on time, I got more and more well known, and my art improved in England, to the point that the comics that I and several of my friends, who you've mentioned, Alan and Brian and Kevin, who had similarly been infatuated with American comics, we all got our work to the point where virtually the Americans came recruiting. DC Comics sent Dick Giordano and Joe Orlando to England on a kind of talent hunt, and they basically just invited a fair number of British creators to meet them and say that they wanted to employ them. And when they told us the terms under which they wanted to employ us, they were so much better than anything we were getting in England. And so it was a no-brainer, really. And a lot of us kind of jumped ship and went to America. So it wasn't so much that it was a British invasion. It was more of an American invitation, I think.
That's a great way to put it. Well, I mean, the invitation definitely made its mark on comics for the rest of history, really. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of your early relationship with Alan Moore, both in the UK and here in the States, working at DC in books like Green Lantern and Swamp Thing, respectively?
Well, I first met Alan in about 1980, at which point I was already kind of established, and I was at a comic convention in England signing stuff, and a mutual friend, Steve Moore, no relation to Alan, introduced us. And then, I thought, well, he's a really nice guy, really sort of seems to know his stuff. And I got to draw one of his scripts, which was a kind of fill-in little short strip in 2000 AD. But I really enjoyed it. I thought, wow, he's brought such a focus to this, and it feels so fresh and novel. And I did a few more scripts, culminating in a story called Chrono Cops, which was a very complex thing about sort of dragnet style cops who operated in space and time and stopped bad things happening in the time continuum. And it involved a lot of going backwards and forwards in a time machine, and was quite a complex thing. But I really enjoyed it, and Alan really liked what I did with it. In fact, after seeing that, he said that he realized at that point that I could draw anything that he asked me to. And I got my start at DC, and I tried to get him in, and we did some proposals for Challengers of the Unknown and John John's Manhunter from Mars, both of which came to nothing because the characters had already been promised to other people. And then I got phoned up one night by Len Wein, who asked me if I knew Alan and could I put him in touch with him. So I gave him Alan's phone number, and Len phoned Alan up, and Alan thought it was a joke and just hung the phone up on him. And then they got Alan to revamp Swamp Thing, which he absolutely made just an incredible job on. It was a title which had been flagging for a long time and that didn't seem to hold much promise, but he just made it into something wonderful. And then I think because DC were very impressed by what he'd done with Swamp Thing, they asked him to do something with the Charlton characters, heroes previously published by Charlton Comics. And I heard about that and said, maybe this is what we can do together. And Alan said, yeah, great. And, that was how we came upon that. And it just came at the right time because we were, we both had some experience by that time. We were professional working comic book guys, but I think we still had that kind of fanboy excitement about what we were doing. And I think we poured all of that into Watchmen. And I think it was the fact it was done with such enthusiasm that made it the success that it turned out to be.
Let's talk a little bit about the Watchmen. So, okay, you and Alan Moore, you're established over at DC. Can you tell us sort of about the birth of Watchmen? How did the project come to be in a little more detail? And was there a pitch involved, or was it just, hey, you guys come up with something great, whatever you want to do it?
No, by the time I came on board, Alan had written a proposal, a kind of an outline, for which basically was the same kind of murder mystery story that we ended up with in Watchmen, but it just featured the Charlton characters. And when DC saw what Alan wanted to do with them, they thought, we just bought these characters. We don't really want them killed or shown to be psychotic or shown them to be, mental people who are mentally ill, or just whatever vibe they got from it. And so they said, could we come up with some new characters? And that was really good because one of the things, if you're a comic book artist, is you sometimes have to draw quite terrible costume designs, page after page after page, or really complicated costume designs. So I was able to come up with characters who looked exactly like I wanted them to look and who I would enjoy drawing, and who were different one to the other, who had different body shapes and physiques and everything like that. And the thing with the Charlton characters were they were examples of all the archetypes of hero comics. There was the kind of Superman, which was Dr. Manhattan. There was the kind of Batman with his cave and his gadgets and his vehicles, which was Night Owl, and so on and so on. So we actually, because we wanted to tell a kind of an archetypal superhero story, or a story set in an archetypal superhero universe, then we had all the necessary components we needed. So from there, I did designs and we sent them backwards and forwards and changed them and added and subtracted until we finally came up with the figures and their costumes and the general feel for it. I really wanted to make sure that it didn't feel like any other American comic book. So that there was a lot to do with the style I was going to draw it in and the way it was going to be colored. And, one of the questions we asked in the comic was, if superheroes were real, what would the world really be like? It would obviously be changed. And I got quite involved in things like the kind of fast food restaurants they might have, or the fashions, or what they would read in place of superhero comics. So we both just piled in ideas on it, and it came to the boil and we were off.
What more can be said about that? The Watchmen universe has now been adapted 2 times to screen, first in 2009 by Zack Snyder, then again, most recently in 2019 by David Lindelof. What have been your thoughts on both of those iterations of the Watchmen universe on screen?
Well, I think, quite soon after we finished working on it, we sold, or rather DC sold the movie option on it. So we always kind of knew there would, or at that point hoped there would be a movie somewhere along the line. But it was kicked around for a long time, and it was obviously a very difficult thing to make a film of because it's rather long and sprawling. It's an ensemble piece, so there's no clear star part in it unless you completely distort the narrative. And also there weren't any characters that anybody had ever heard of before. So I think it took a few years before it was feasible to make a film of it. In fact, Larry Gordon, one of the producers of the movie adaptation, said it wasn't so much that Watchmen was unfilmable, but that it was unfinanceable because, at the box office, it didn't really mean much to anybody. But I think by the time it finally came around, sort of in 2009, something like that, people were so familiar with the notion of comic books and the kind of tropes of comic books that something like Watchmen did make sense, and particularly as the superhero movies were getting darker, you know, the kind of Batman movies had quite a dark edge to them, that it really became feasible. As for the film, I thought it was a difficult thing to do. I think Zack Snyder and his crew did as good a job of it as anybody could possibly have expected. It's a slightly uneven film. I think it's got wonderful bits in it, and it's got other bits in it that don't work quite as well. But I think on a project like that, that's inevitable. I was quite happy with the changes that they made to the end of it. I think it made more sense in terms of a movie. And I was quite happy with it. Alan, by that time, had completely fallen out of love, if he'd ever been in love with Hollywood, and didn't want anything to do with the film. But I enjoyed it. You know, I consulted on it, and I got to travel and meet the actors and, you know, have a pretty high old time on it. And so it was, as far as I was concerned, the film adaptation was good. As regards to the TV series, that came a bit from left field, and I was familiar with Damon Lindelof's work on the Leftovers and obviously Lost, and I was quite intrigued to talk to him, and I was very struck by his take, you know, what he wanted to do, and also by his respect for me, but respect for the property. And he clearly was an absolute diehard fan, you know, and wanted to be very, very faithful. And so I kind of cautiously gave it my blessing. And then when I got to actually see what he'd done, I was absolutely blown away, because it was taken in a completely novel direction. It was set so far in time away from the movie and the graphic novel that it was a whole different world. It wasn't a sequel, it was more of an extrapolation, you know, it was things had evolved a lot. I think the real measure of it was there were loads of things in there that I saw them and I thought, why didn't we think of that? That's such a good idea. So, I was very impressed with that as well. And it did very well, I think, critically and commercially. And I think the reaction most people had to it was they thought, this isn't going to be very good. But they, like me, were completely won over. And I think it was true to the spirit of Watchmen, because basically Damon told the story that he had to tell. And when he told the story, he just finished, just much like Alan and I did with the comic book.
Yeah, I've always said that Snyder's adaptation of The Watchmen is probably, in my opinion, one of the best page to screen, at least visually. I mean, it looks so identical to your art that was on the page. Very respectable. Yeah. And what Lindelof did was spectacular. I mean, how many Emmy nominations did that thing get? I mean, it's a fan favorite thing. And one last question. This comes from a viewer about The Watchmen, and then we'll move on. It comes from a viewer by the name of John Cole. He asks, sort of lightheartedly, in your opinion, personal opinion, is Ozymandias a hero or a villain? And same question about Rorschach.
Well, I suppose you'd have to get to the definition of what's a hero and what's a villain. I mean, I think both Ozymandias and Rorschach, as far as they're concerned, are heroes. You know, they're doing the right thing. They're taking a lot of time and effort to do what they think is right. So from that point of view, they are heroes. Their motivation is to be heroes. But in the way they act, to many people, they would be considered villains, you know, because Rorschach's obviously a vigilante, and which is a very questionable position to occupy. And Ozymandias is a kind of narcissist. So I think you know, they're both heroes and villains. I mean, I think the one thing that people really seem to like about Rorschach, and I think it says something about the public psyche, is that Rorschach, you might not like him, but at least you know what he stands for. At least he's consistent. And I think a lot of people see consistency as being heroic. You know, he says something like, doesn't he never compromise, not even in the face of Armageddon, you know, so he's absolutely dedicated to being this consistent kind of character. And I think some people, misguidedly or not, find that way of thinking attractive.
Yeah, well, thanks for that question, John. Really appreciate it. Moving on, in 2012, you and Mark Miller, a good friend, by the way, of the folks here at Mainframe, released the series Kingsman, The Secret Service. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience working with Mr. Miller and kind of how that project came to be? Because I love the guy. He's such a great guy.
Oh yeah, Mark's great, and I must say, you know, he's really played the game very, very well. You know, he's of a slightly later generation of comic book creator than me, and I think we were kind of the test pilots for what you could do from the point of view of experimenting with material or experimenting with creator ownership. Mark certainly has learned all the lessons that we discovered, and has played it very, very well. I mean, I think he's creatively very free, and obviously he's doing very well in a financial sense as well. So congratulations to him for that. Very, very well deserved. But yeah, I mean, we wanted to work together. He actually first got in touch with me when he was about 16. And he sent me a letter saying that, you know, he quite liked Watchmen, and that now that I'd finished that, my next move should be to illustrate a story that he'd written. And I believe he sent me an outline of some story that he'd cooked up. And I sent him a very gracious letter back, apparently. I have no memory of this, but Mark still has the letter. So, you know, it really happened. And I turned him down very nicely, which refers to the earlier question, always try and be a nice guy. And you know, as the years went on, I saw his name begin to appear and think, oh, he's a, you know, there's that thing when you read a comic book and you think, this is really well written. Who wrote this? And I kept seeing his name pop up. Anyway, we started talking seriously, I suppose, in about, must have been around the time the Watchmen movie came out. Said, wouldn't it be great to do something together? And he had a number of ideas for comic book series. And one of them was this kind of spy story, espionage, James Bond, secret agent stuff, story that he'd cooked up with Matthew Vaughn while they'd been chatting, while they were filming, while Matthew was filming an X-Men movie. And they developed a few ideas, basically along the lines of, you know, James Bond used to be great, but you don't get that kind of movie these days. And James Bond feels a bit sorry for himself, and it's all a bit angsty. Wouldn't it be great to have a real old style, you know, full on wish fulfillment, aspirational secret agent story? So we came up with some takes on the thing that he talked over with Matthew. Originally it was going to be set in the USA, and it was called Uncle Sam, and in it the younger character did indeed have an Uncle Samuel, so he was Uncle Sam. But then we thought it'd be better to set it in England, and that was what really made it for me, because there is a kind of a class structure in England, and you know, this very much played into that. And it also meant that we could do the characterizations and the settings in a slightly more authentic way. And I'd never done a spy story before, so it felt very fresh. So we did that and had a lot of fun doing it. Mark wrote some great stuff, and I enjoyed drawing it. And I suppose it shouldn't be a surprise, but because Matthew Vaughn had been part of the creation of it, it was no surprise that it became a movie. But it wasn't like Watchmen, where it was an adaptation. It was actually kind of the same story, but with a completely different expression. So there were some of the same characters, but they looked different, and the setting was a bit different. And the older character was not his uncle; he was a friend of his dad's. So we imagined a sort of Bill Gates character as a bad guy, but we ended up with Samuel L. Jackson, which was great. So it was a really interesting journey, and a completely different journey than Watchmen. But and the movie, I can say without being immodest, I really, really enjoyed that movie. And so many of my friends who aren't comic book fans think it's one of the best films they've ever seen. They absolutely loved it. So yeah, that will turn out pretty well.
Yeah, both the two movies came out to great fanfare and really great fan love. It's not only a great adaptation, it's just a really really fun movie. I personally also really loved the sequel. I thought it was an absolute blast. There's another one coming out soon. Any involvement with you on that film creatively, or anything you know about it?
No, I mean I'm very hands off with it. I mean the film that's supposed to be coming out shortly, which would have already been out a long time ago if it hadn't been for the pandemic, is called the Kingsman, and it's kind of the origin story of the Kingsman organization. And again, I'm not privy to any inside knowledge, but it looks like there will be a further movie, which I think will be the character we introduced in the first Kingsman movie. But now, rather than being the apprentice, he's the master. So it's going to be about his adventures after he's grown into his secret agent role. And I'm certainly looking forward to that myself. I think that sounds like it could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, Hollywood has definitely fallen in love with that franchise, because there was talk of doing several new Kingsman films. There was talk of doing a television series. So it doesn't sound like Hollywood's giving up on the Kingsman franchise anytime soon.
Yeah, well, I think it fills a space that's wide open at the moment. I mean, after all that kind of stuff, you know, the sort of James Bond kind of movies were huge in their time and have been going for years and years and years. And my other theory about it as well is that although there are dark elements to Kingsman, that it's actually, after all these years of really grim hero movies, it's quite refreshing to have something which is quite funny and is quite positive and is aspirational, you know, rather than, oh my God, who wants to be Batman? It's so miserable. You can watch the Kingsman movies and think, I'd like to be that guy with a flashy car and the girlfriends and the weapons and the gadgets. That would be great. So I think it's kind of riding that trend as well.
It does. It's just like every little kid. I mean, Kingsman is a kid playing with their toys, just like any good James Bond movie should be. I know we're a little bit over on time, so I want to go ahead and start wrapping it up. Kind of my final question is, as an artist, as a creator, who do you draw inspiration from? If you could pay homage to one of your coworkers, one of your people in the industry, or maybe just a small handful, who would that be?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about influences, I mean, I've read so many comics and I've got such a collection of comics as well that it would be really hard to boil my influences down to even a dozen, you know. I mean, there are the ones that I loved as a kid, and I think stuff you're exposed to when you're young stays with you longer. I mean, there are some incredible artists working today. I don't even know the names of most of them, but you look at the average stack of comic books and the standard of artwork is just so impressive. But I mean, I grew up on people like, well, the usual suspects: Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Carmen Infantino, Gil Kane, Will Eisner. You know, those were my early influences. And in Britain, people like Frank Hampson, who created Dan Dare, Frank Bellamy, who drew lots of stuff when I was younger, and also lots of unsung and kind of unknown artists who were Italian and Spanish, who drew a lot of comics that were published in Britain in the sort of 60s and 70s. So there's a huge range of influences. I should also mention people like Wally Wood and Will Elder, who drew funny stuff for Mad Comic, and I used to love the detail that they put in it. So that was one thing I like to incorporate in my own work. But I also really liked an artist called Alex Toth, who is the artist. He's the one, if you talk to any artist, he'll always be in the top 5, who is a master of minimalism and simplification and great drawing, who was at the opposite end really than Wood and Elder. So I think that I've tried to assimilate the whole range and come up with a way of drawing that feels as enjoyable to me as it was to look at the work of those other artists.
It's so funny you mentioned that, because we had Tim Sale on here yesterday, and he paid great homage to Italian comic book artists and Alex Toth.
Yeah. I mean, Tim I know, and Tim is a man of great taste and discernment. So I'm pleased to hear we're on the same page. But yeah, I mean, the whole European tradition of comics is a whole world in its own. There's a vast world of American comics, but the world of European comics is vast and is extremely varied as well, and a little bit less tied to genre. So it gives people more of a chance to have a unique feel or unique subject matter. So yeah, it is a wonderful world of comics, really. And of course, most of it is accessible these days, which is great.
Yeah, well, I want to just remind everybody, head on over to Talent Talk Live for tickets, if they are still available, to Dave's Talent Talk. And if they are sold out, I'm sure maybe you'll do another one to benefit the Hero Initiative sometime in 2021.
That would be very, very, very likely. So yeah, please do rush. Run, do not walk, but carefully.
Yes.
And yeah, see if you can join up and have a chat with me and get us a sketch card to keep as a souvenir. And if you don't, watch out for announcements of the next one. It's
exactly.
all for good.
Yeah, and that's at talenttalklive.com. Dave, thanks so much for taking time out of your very busy day. Hope you have a wonderful weekend and a very happy new year.
You're very welcome, Chuck. The same to you. Take care out there, and I'll no doubt be seeing you soon.
Well, thank you so much, guys. And thanks, everybody, for watching. This has been an absolute blast, and we'll see you here next time.